Well, a little bit different episode for you guys this week. I was invited by the Point Clear Republican women to host a town hall with our Attorney General, Steve Marshall. We covered all kinds of things. There's obviously a ton of stuff going on, whether it's avoiding World War III, the big, beautiful bill, but more pertinent to what's going on in our state, it's the 3-year anniversary of Roe versus Wade being overturned. There was a judgment by the Supreme Court upholding Tennessee's transgender ban that was linked to the Alabama transgender ban, talking to the Attorney General about that, what his role was in that, what 1819's role was in that. We also talk immigration and the Metro Area Crime Suppression Unit. You're not going to want to miss this incredible episode, this Town Hall special version of 1819 News, the podcast. We have an incredible culture here in the state of Alabama, but our politics and public policy don't reflect the people of Alabama. Media drives culture. Culture is what drives politics and public policy. Welcome, everyone, to 1819 News, the podcast. I'm Bryan Dawson, CEO of 1819 News, and host of this here podcast, where we are in pursuit of a free and flourishing Alabama every single week. And this week is no different, as we are now at the Point Clear Republican women doing a town hall, joined by Attorney General Steve Marshall, and really excited about the conversation that we're going to have, and we're going to dive right in. Steve, thanks for coming down.
Good to be here. By the way, this is the best venue, frankly. Jeremy and Jaron, thank you for getting this. This is such a cool place. Anybody in here thankful for 1819 News, right? And I know it's your podcast, but I'm going to stop you a second. I have to tell this story. When sort of Bryan and I first met, I've been your AG now 8.5 years. When I first came on board, if it wasn't reported in AL.com, nobody knew it was happening. And frankly, AL.com didn't care about the issues that people in this room care about. And suddenly there was this web-based news that was talking about some of the stuff that we were doing or some of the issues that we were a part of. And I thought it was pretty fascinating. And he walked up to me in a meeting one time and introduced himself. I was like, I've been waiting to meet you for a long time. And he said, you ought to come see me. And so we set a time for him to come by the office, and he walks back. And if you've ever been, we're right across from the Capitol up on the 3rd floor. Bryan walked all the way back to my office. I've got some chairs back there. And I said, great to see you, sit down. And he looked at me and goes, you obviously do not do a background check on the people that you invite in your office. Yeah, right? So any of you that know Bryan's testimony, remarkable story of grace and vision, and so proud of him. But anyway, that was the moment that we began talking about kind of what 1819 wanted to do. And I'm very grateful that 1819 existed during the period of COVID to be able to review critically what was going on and to be able to report it in a way that other folks weren't doing. So anyway, we've done these conversations before, but it's fun to be able to do it here, although not across a big table. I feel like we're on the opposite sides of the team. But anyway, excited about tonight.
Yeah, no, and this is great. I love the interactive nature of it. Feel free to clap. Don't hold back or anything because there's cameras rolling. You guys like that. This is what we're doing. So, that was one of my favorite memories of 1819 was going to the AG's office and being like, you guys. Anyway,
Gotcha.
So, where to begin? We're in the midst of what could potentially be World War III. It seems Trump has put a stop to that. That's good. So many things going on in the world. Amen. So many things going on in the world that it almost kind of distracts from something that's very important today. I believe today or around today, 3 years ago, Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Yeah, that deserves a lot of applause.
And that's a very big deal. I'm going to give my version of how it happened. He'll tell you the real version. But basically what I saw happen is, for 50 years before I was born, all these Republicans and conservatives promising that they were going to get this done. It was the biggest item. It was the only coalition we could really build on the right was a pro-life moral majority, and Roe v. Wade was at the heart of it. And we heard promises and promises and promises. And here comes this New York billionaire that used to be a Democrat that gave money to Planned Parenthood, okay? And he's the guy who puts the Supreme Court justices in place to overturn Roe versus Wade, which is, I believe God has a sense of humor in the way that he does things, and I think that contrast is very important. But essentially, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, once those justices were put in place, all of the Republican supermajority states put together the most conservative pro-life legislation they possibly could, whether it's Alabama, Mississippi, whatever, hoping that it would get tied up in the Supreme Court, right? And Alabama, which is, and again, the God's sense of humor is amazing. Alabama puts together pro-life legislation they would never put together. It was extreme. It's the most restrictive pro-life legislation in the United States. They pass it knowing that in their minds, this is never going to get overturned. Okay? Well, Alabama sends theirs up. A bunch of other states do as well. Mississippi does theirs. Mississippi's is the one that gets pulled into the Supreme Court and is used to overturn Roe versus Wade, and lo and behold, now the state of Alabama has to uphold this legislation that they just passed that's extremely conservative that they never would have passed in a million years, okay? It just immediately, as soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, the sponsor of that bill was saying, we've got to add exceptions, we've got to do something, we've got to, but getting rid of pro-life legislation is political suicide, and we're here, to help anybody, commit political suicide if they want to try and get rid of it. So, but that is one of the biggest political victory. It is the biggest political victory I think I've seen in my lifetime. And I want to have you kind of opine on how significant that is and was and what it's done from your point of view.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, to drill down a little bit into Dobbs. What's interesting to me about that case is this was the decision of the left to be able to challenge that statute. And what's interesting about what Mississippi passed is it was less restrictive than Alabama. It actually had a period of weeks that it discussed. And if you compare to where Mississippi was before versus what they passed, it basically added a 6-week period in which a woman in Mississippi couldn't get an abortion. And so the left decided for a 6-week increment, they wanted to be able to take this case up. And it became the opportunity for the Supreme Court finally to be able to overturn the atrocity that was Roe versus Wade. But it's a little bit greed, and I think we're going to have a little bit of that theme when we talk Alabama's transgender kid protection case. And thanks to all of my legislative folks that are here for protecting kids, and we were able to defend it. But it just shows how greedy the left was. And when we're able to put together the coalition of folks to be able to assert the legal arguments that the court ultimately embraced, I'm excited. You heard about Lynn Fitch coming. Lynn's going to be able to tell you sort of Mississippi's story about how literally she walked in the door as a new AG and had to make a decision within 48 hours of whether or not they were going to appeal, and she did. But y'all, there's also a lesson learned, even bigger picture, because Roe goes back a long time before some of the folks in this room were born. And there was opportunity after opportunity with legislation passed across the country to resurrect that issue before the Supreme Court so that they could rectify what they caused with Roe, and we were losing, and we continue to lose. But what everybody needs to embrace is those defeats didn't cause us to stop. It didn't cause people to quit organizing and to be able to march on D.C. every year, to be able to lift up the rights of kids. It didn't cause others to be able to gather together in small groups or in larger groups to be able to pray for the opportunity for Roe to be overturned. And it didn't stop state legislators, including Alabama, to be able to pass a constitutional amendment that paved the way once we were ultimately victorious. And I think everybody in here believed at one point in time we were going to win. We didn't know when, we didn't know that vehicle, but we clearly knew at some point that we were going to prevail, and we finally did. And so I tell you that story because it relates a little bit to what you give me the privilege of being able to do now, which is to aggressively defend the values of the people of our state and to assert legal positions that matter to the people in this room. And it means sometimes we're not going to win the first time. There are cases I can point to you over history where the legal position that was asserted to begin with, whether in Alabama or another red state, wasn't initially embraced by the court. But over time, as we've been able to flip the judiciary, as we've been able to get factually maybe cases that were a little more compelling, we've been able to flip the script on issues that matter to the people in our state. And I think that's something you're going to continue to see over time is Republicans staking out the right position, understanding that it may not be a victory to begin with, but eventually we're going to get there and we're going to set the stage. And sometimes it happens incrementally. We saw, for example, even with Roe, that the court backed away from the original reasoning in Roe, kind of developed this strange test that they eventually imposed on the states. And they saw it just simply didn't make sense. Not only legally was it not consistent with the Constitution, but also factually it was impossible for courts to be able to get any kind of clarity around it. And y'all, it was with great pride that when Dobbs came out, that we had within, I think, about 4 hours, a petition in front of Myron Thompson, who's always been that obstacle for us in getting good decisions out of the Middle District, that even Myron Thompson, within 12 hours of Dobbs, reinstated Alabama's protection for the unborn. And that was a major victory because we were the first state to be able to do it.
Yep. Another huge victory that we've seen as of recent, there was a podcast that I recently recorded with Craig Monger. It was about a whole nother scenario. But at the end of it, we got into the issue of transgenderism and the absurdity of it and all these other things. And Craig Monger, this is a rough quote, said that Steve Marshall is going to go down in history as the person who exposed basically the monetization of the transgender industry, or at least the pursuit of the financial aspect of it. It's obviously more than that, but the overturning, or it's not even overturning, the upholding of the transgender ban that happened here. Was it VCAP? Is that the name of the legislation? So we passed great legislation in the state to protect vulnerable children, VCAP legislation. Great job by our legislature doing that. Well, immediately, the Biden Department of Justice attacks. Becky Garrettson is getting attacked again. They're threatening Eagle Forum. All this stuff happens, and there's this huge fight. And I'm not going to be able to do this story justice. I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk about, because it was recently through Tennessee. Theirs was the one that was essentially upheld. Talk about how all that played out and your part in it. And
yeah, and by the way, Craig was very kind. My wife needs to hear that story, right? And then maybe she'd think her husband's doing something good. But I want to make sure, I know, Matt, you were in the legislature. Jennifer, were you there when VCAP was passed? I can't see her. But Alabama was the third state in the country to protect kids from child abuse and experimentation that in Europe had already walked away from. And I'll say this, and Matt, you'll remember, you tried one session and weren't able to get it through because there was significant opposition. It's like, gosh, how can Alabama do this? You're backwards. You know, you're going to hurt economic development in our state. I mean, there was clear pushback on the legislature because y'all, candidly, I didn't know what gender dysphoria was. You know, wasn't familiar at all with what that mental health condition was about, or that, frankly, there were kids that were somehow or another confused about their gender. That just wasn't something that registered on my radar screen. But then once that bill failed the first time, it came back and we were beginning to learn a little bit more. We learned that there was a clinic at UAB that was conducting this experimentation and sterilization on kids because of what they were doing. And the Alabama legislature stood strong. And you can imagine, almost from the day that the governor signed it, and it was in effect, the left sued us. And one of the things that's unique about this case is I really do think it is going to be one that they're going to write books about, because it shows everything that the left tries to do to be able to enforce their agenda on the country. Now, number one, the transgender ideology wasn't new, because remember, we saw it during the Obama administration, where they wanted to open up the locker rooms and the bathrooms. We're able to sue and we're able to stop that, and that was before my tenure as AG. But literally, it was almost like when Joe Biden was elected, he looked at Obama and said, "Hold my beer, because here we go." Because it was all on a front of the Biden administration using every vehicle and lever of the federal government to be able to do it. I was telling the story today earlier in a speech about using the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Labor, using public health through WIC, all to be able to enforce this agenda. But it was really the fight over Alabama's law that exposed how far the left was willing and able to go. And let me give you the three examples. You heard of something called lawfare, right? We know what's going on right now, right? All over the country, where the left is manipulating the judicial system to thwart the Trump agenda. I had a chance to be able to stand with President Trump in New York City during a criminal case again, where the criminal justice system was weaponized against him. Well, this didn't just start during the Trump administration, because one of the things that happened is once Alabama's law was passed, two separate groups of plaintiffs, some involving representing parents, others outside groups, sued Alabama's law, claimed it was unconstitutional. And they drew conservative judges. And eventually, all of those cases are assigned to a dear friend of mine, Judge Lyles Burke, who is a conservative judge. And within, I think it was 6 hours of the case being assigned to Judge Burke, guess what happened? They dismissed it. Gave no explanation why, because it wasn't like the client said suddenly, oh, this law is constitutional. And it wasn't like the other lawyers said, you know what, the state of Alabama's right. You ought to be able to protect your kids. They didn't get the judge they wanted, and because of that, they dismissed that case. And y'all, that didn't go over real well with the federal judges, nor should it, because that is sort of known as forum shopping or judge shopping, and that's not supposed to happen. To the point that every chief judge, for we have 3 districts of the federal courts in Alabama, conducted hearings where they brought those lawyers in to be able to say, why don't you do this? Because not only did they dismiss those cases, but yes, less than a week later, one of those same groups of plaintiffs and lawyers filed the case over again. And then Judge Burke was able to get that control of that, so they didn't even accomplish anything. But they dug into that, and eventually, and this has happened even since a lot has gone on in the case, Judge Burke issued an order finding lawyers in contempt of the ethical obligations of lawyers. And y'all, it's great to see a federal judge who's willing to hold lawyers accountable to the legal standards that apply to everybody else, where the left's trying to manipulate the system so that they can get a more favorable ruling than maybe they would get from somebody else. And so, number one, it shows you how far the left is willing to go. Second thing that case showed us is, and I'll give those on the other side credit, is they are strategic. And so how do you take over what it is they wanted to accomplish with the trans agenda? Number one, you gain control of the medical organizations. And if you don't think right now the American Medical Association, the American Pediatric Association isn't captured by the left, then you're not reading much about what's going on. Same is true for the American Bar Association.
Also the Alabama Department of Public Health.
Yeah. So that is the way that they can be able to control what's going on. So the left has all of their advocates in leadership positions for those medical organizations, because after all, if the American Pediatric Association endorses certain treatments for kids, and that must mean something that we all ought to do, right? Because doctors care about their patients. They're not political animals. They don't have an agenda of their own. And so we have the medical organizations take it. But then if you integrate activist lawyers with those medical organizations, what do they have the ability to do? And say, hey, doctors, when you define standards of care, we want you to use these certain buzzwords, because when you use these words in developing your standards, it helps us advance the agenda for those that we represent, in this case, those on the transgender side. So you have active interaction between those on the left and lawyers, helping them manipulate medical standards to assist them in accomplishing their political goals. And then third, when you have all of the resources of the federal government drawn against you, you can leverage the power of the government in a way that likewise can accomplish political goals. Anybody familiar with Rachel Levine? All right. I told the people earlier that they used to put my picture up next to Rachel Levine's, and y'all, I ain't a pretty man, but it was a big difference between the two of us, right? And Rachel Levine was second in charge at Health and Human Services, transgender, talked about, what a wonderful thing it was to be a parent, and yet he's going to deprive kids that he's advocating, gender affirming care that would take it away from them. Makes no sense whatsoever. But we, through the Alabama case, discovered emails where part of what the legislature was able to do is not only ban puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, but also said we're not going to do surgeries on kids. Well, this international organization called WPATH which was setting up those standards of care that the left would use, was going to at least put some age restrictions on when kids could have body parts taken off. I mean, how radical is that, right? I mean, anyway, they were going to put those, and Rachel Levine in Health and Human Services reaches in and says, hey, can you take those out? Because if you put those age restrictions in, we think that's going to impact our ability to advance our political agenda for the transgender movement. And guess what they did? Those age restrictions immediately went away. And so you have this conspiracy, y'all, that involve medical organizations, the Biden administration, and leftist lawyers representing the activist organizations that were prepared to go after every state that passed one of these bills, and that's exactly what they did in Alabama. And so what is unique about their strategy, and I think this is what people miss, because I will tell you this up front, we were losing these cases to begin with, including with Judge Burke, and for reasons that I think that you can all appreciate. Because I think everybody in here believes in parental rights, correct? Yeah. That we want to be able to allow parents to be able to dictate what's going on with their kids. And so that's philosophically something that was very important to Judge Burke. And so when they initially file these cases, what they seek is injunctive relief, which means courts have to have a hearing really quickly for the parties to present evidence or to rebut evidence, and so you don't have the ability to engage in what they call full discovery. And so within just a couple of weeks of the filing, they're in front of Judge Burke, and what do they present? This WPATH organization that comes in and goes, Judge, we have these standards of care that have been vetted through research studies, and what these studies show us is that this is the appropriate way to treat kids that present with gender-affirming care. They have parents that come up and say, Judge, we went to doctors, and doctors told us that if we don't do something to help our kids by using gender-affirming care, that if my child isn't allowed to transition from a male to a female, we believe they're going to commit suicide because they're more likely to commit suicide. And then they were able to present experts who said, we've been involved in the field and we're familiar with multiple systemic reviews of the research in this area. And Judge, it is absolutely the standard of care. This is what we needed to be able to do with kids. And for us, from the state, obviously we had what the legislature did. We were able to contact some experts to begin with, but you've got a judge that's hearing all this stuff about what, not only in America, but also internationally, what is appropriate for kids. And he struggled with that and thought, well, I really need to be able to allow parents to be able to do it. And so we lost that case with him initially. Basically, he stayed the ability to enforce the law for us then to engage in discovery. And y'all, I'll be candid, it was a tough time for those of us that were trying to defend these laws, because every case after every case we were losing. The same lawyers, same experts testifying against us. Other states kind of gave up a little bit. I'll be transparent about that. Not completely, but they didn't invest the resources. And I went to the legislature and said, we need money. Because look, I had Bloomberg, Soros-backed groups that were investing in these nonprofits that were doing it, and they had all the money they had. I had the entire resources of the federal government that were coming against us because they intervened in these cases. And we said, Alabama is going to be the state that draws the line in the sand. And so not only did we put together a remarkable team, and shout out to Eddie LaCour and Barrett Baldry and the folks at our team, but we also had Alliance Defending Freedom. For those of you that may be familiar with the town hall we had in here in Baldwin County, gosh, less than a year ago about Title IX, ADF was there, and ADF joined our team. And then we were able to get some conservative lawyers that also came in, and we said, you going to put together an army to fight you? Well, we're coming at you as well. And we were able to get, through this process called discovery, records from the federal government, from WPATH, and from other outside groups that again revealed a medical, ethical, and legal scandal, the likes of which I don't think we've seen. And look, our good friends in Europe saw the light before we did. We had the CAS review come out that demonstrated again how the science didn't support what was going on, and to the point that just about a month and a half ago, anybody remember the Roberto Duran? You know, there was the fighter, and he walked in the middle of the ring and he gave up, and they called it No Mas, the No Mas fight. Yeah, this was the No Mas litigation, because the plaintiff said, we're done. and they voluntarily dismissed their case before the Scarmitti decision came out just this past week and said, we're not going to proceed against Alabama's law again. And y'all, tremendous victory that we're able to get for Alabama. But when the Supreme Court came out last week and 6-3 decision, Justice Thomas's concurrence, as he typically is, was spot on, identifying all the facts that Alabama put in their brief about what took place with our case, is that they ruled to be able to allow the 27 states now that have passed similar laws to feel strong that their laws are going to be vindicated because they rightfully were protecting kids. And so, y'all, that was the longest maybe, but great news. But here's the other thing that I should highlight, is that we were light years ahead of educating not only our state and our nation and those internationally, because 1819 cared enough to cover the case. And what was initially the good thing, what drove their attention to it, and they covered a little bit of what was going on, but they didn't know what was going on in Discovery, was when the Department of Justice decided to subpoena Eagle Forum, where Becky Garrettson is. By the way, never let Becky lead one of your organizations if you don't want to be getting a subpoena from the federal government, because that's not our first rodeo. But they also did one of our pro-life groups that also was very supportive. And the federal government came in and said, we want to see all your records about where you were lobbying the legislature to advance this bill. We want to know all the studies that you were using to say this was the right thing to do. And oh, by the way, we want to know who your donors are. Now, you talking about an abuse of federal power, and y'all, that didn't sit well with my friend Judge Burke. And not only did he eventually make the federal government pay for the cost of the lawyers for Eagle Forum and the other group to be able to push back, but I think for him, it became that moment to say, you know, I'm not hearing the whole story. I'm not getting the true picture of what's going on in here. And Judge and I, y'all, I've known him for 25, 30 years now almost. We've grown up together in practice of law, and he's a savvy guy, but he began to see this for the fraud it was. And so 1819 began to cover that, which I think got Craig immersed into the kind of the legal nuances of the case. And knowing that what we were doing was discovering all of the sort of the things I told you about, and there's tons more. But y'all, it was all protected. It was all under seal so that you couldn't see it, nobody else could see it, only the lawyers could see it. And it was only until we were able to file our summary judgment motion where we began to be able to get some of this out. And it really became out in sort of drips and drabs. But 1819 became a bulldog on the story because they were beginning to see what was going on at a national level. They were aware of the Cash report. They began to see what WPATH was and kind of how the transgender movement was moving. That was all when the Title IX stuff was beginning to kick up as well. And it was almost like you're connecting the dots. And you're beginning to see how this is not just one-off and one isolated incident, but instead this is part of an effort of the Biden administration to transform gender ideology across our country. And so thanks again for being able to do it. But huge victory for the states. But y'all, most importantly, it's a victory for kids. And if you hadn't heard the stories of the detransitioners, those are stories you need to read about and hear about, because they are the ones that have suffered the most. I'll tell you, one of the most bizarre conversations I've ever had was with a gentleman from New York, right when all this kind of got started. He told me his personal story about how when he was 12 or 13, he was kind of confused about it. He thought he wanted to be a girl because this is this kind of stuff he liked to do. And then he just got into his early 20s after having all of these drugs used and did some of the surgeries. And he's like, I just realized I was gay. I didn't want to be a girl, but that's kind of where I was in my head. And now the gay men are attracted to me because I look like a woman. And y'all, it was just like so confusing, but it showed how devious and evil this movement was. And so even for, you know, sort of people like that, it just felt like this was a calling for us to be able to fight. And so glad we did. I want to read, if you don't mind, I found, it was a quote, I shared this earlier today. This is going to make you proud to be an Alabamian. As one of the guys that has followed this at a national level, has written a lot about it. He said this just a few months ago. When historians look back and ask what led to the downfall of this medical pseudo-experiment on children, the activist decision to sue Alabama will be seen as their most significant blunder. Amen to that.
Amen.
Yeah.
That is awesome. It's a beautiful thing when we see Alabama lead, and we've got the potential to lead in so many areas where we know they're the core beliefs of the people and of the people in the legislature. And one of the things I've been doing is interviewing. I'm probably the most critical person of our legislature, and I usually target leadership. But I've been bringing on people from the legislature onto the podcast to talk to them and hear from them, and it's been very educational for me. And one of the things that I hear as it pertains to this is the pushback that good Christian legislators that want to do good things. Let's talk about, forgive me if I don't remember, maybe it was Susan DuBose that was trying to move the medical age of consent from 14 to 18. And the war that she had to move it from, and this is directly ties in medical age of consent, obviously surrounding the transgender stuff is where that's coming from. And all of the medical associations here in Alabama, not the federal ones, not the Biden ones, the ones right here in Alabama, were pushing back against her and every other legislator that signed on to this very good bill that was saying that parental rights, again, that comes back to parental rights, that this legislation should make medical age of consent 18, or even in Alabama we could have made it 19, but it was 18, was the goal. And they went through a world war of all these doctors and these medical associations telling them, we can't have parents in here making decisions. These parents are getting in the way. These parents are getting in the way. Which to me is the most absurd thing in this absurd thought process that has entered in, and I'm going to ramble a little bit, forgive me, but one of the things I see, whether it's medical age of consent, whether it's any area where children, and I've been very vocal for a long time about the fact that and it sounds a little bit like my hair's on fire when I say they're trying to steal our children, not physically, but they're trying to steal the hearts, minds, and souls of our children. That is obvious. I looked like a lunatic 5 years ago saying it. Now I look a bit like a prophet. But it's true. But what it looks like to me is that there are, let's just say, I don't know what the actual figures are, 20% of the parents who have children in the state are derelict and aren't good, okay? And what they're doing is they're looking at those 20% that are derelict and saying, hey, let's make some laws based off these derelict parents, right? And now the 80% of people who are capable, good parents, are now going to be forced into doing things. We're basically making the exception the rule, which I think kind of gets dangerous. But to me, it's just a bizarre thing in the state of Alabama that the medical age of consent is at 14. Praise God, our legislature got it moved to 16. But the fact that they're trying to do good things, and they have to go to war against the C6s, the whatever they're called, their unions. There's another word that they use now, associations. There it is. I know I'd come up with it. All these associations that are going to war with legislators trying to do good stuff over basic common sense things. It's like, well, no wonder we can't get anything done, right? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or if you were aware of any of that with the age of consent.
Yeah,
stuff.
I wasn't with the age of consent, but also let me give some praise. The legislature was very proactive in helping us establish a bulwark against the Biden administration. I'd take girls' sports and locker rooms as well. All of your legislative delegation lockstep in saying, we're going to protect the integrity of girls' sports. We're also going to protect the integrity of our bathrooms and our locker rooms. And so that's really strong. And by the way, who would have thought we had to do that? Right? I mean, who would have ever considered that is important legislation, or the fact that we have a What is a Woman Act, right? To be able to establish what that is. And so I think for us, when we were fighting the Title IX fight, and I think, by the way, that's basically going to be over because the regulation is going to go away, but what our legislature was able to give us the ability to do when we were aggressively fighting that regulation is to say, number one, Alabama's weighed in on this, Judge, and this is an important public policy position for us. And to the extent that you rule against us, then you're going to preempt what the representative representatives of Alabama's populace have said should be the law of the land. So it gave me the ability as the AG to have an even more aggressive position when we were fighting on those. And y'all, again, they were absolutely right in what they did. And this wasn't even, what's interesting to me, particularly about the sports and locker room issue, this is not a close call. I mean, there's a lot of issues in our country that's 51-49. That's an 80-20, right? I mean, y'all have seen some of the track athletes that have been out there, and I had the chance to be able to hear at the White House not that long ago from the young North Carolina volleyball player who had trauma as a result of her participation where male was on the other side, or for the Maine track athletes that, the pole vaulter who didn't place when he was a male the year before, but then grows his hair longer and claims to be a female the next year and suddenly wins the prize and their team takes the state championship. And the left wants to say, well, you're trying to find a solution then when there's not a problem. It's a problem. And it was a problem. We continue to hear those stories now. And y'all, there is a group of people that would absolutely, and there's a wonderful therapist here who can talk about those that are males that want to go into a female bathroom or locker room. Okay? I mean, I don't think it takes a stretch.
I was on to them right away with that.
Yeah,
I knew what they were up to.
And the fact that we want to protect that, is absolutely where we need to be. And so, I want to commend our policymakers because they were aggressive on that issue. They took it on quickly, and they passed good, solid laws for me to be able to use aggressively on those cases.
If you're running a ministry or you own a business, my guess is that you've been thinking about starting a podcast for a while now, but for various reasons it hasn't happened yet. Send me an email. I need to personally connect you with Yonder Child Media. They built this studio in 2 days and tackle all of the production. I just come in, start talking, and leave. It's that easy. They do everything else. Whether you want to record at your business or a home office like they just built for me, you come in, start talking, and Yonder Child will do everything else. Send me an email. That's going to be Bryan, Bryan.Dawson, Dawson, at 1819news.com, and I'd be happy to personally connect you. I know anybody who shows up to this group is probably very much wired like me, where we are hypercritical of the legislature. Okay? There's no doubt about that. I'm looking around the room at people I talk to often about criticizing the legislature. But as much as we criticize, we need to be at the ready to congratulate them and high-five them and tell everyone how proud of them that you are when they do good things. That is something that we absolutely have to do. And when they do good things, and again, in order to do something good in the legislature, you have to go to war, which is insane that in the state of Alabama, that common sense legislation, you have to go to war with some association or with some liberal nonprofit that Soros is funding that you never heard of, and all of a sudden, it's insane. So, obviously, we got to keep people's feet to the fire, hold people in public office accountable. But when they do good, I think it's imperative that we congratulate them, pat them on the back, and support
Here's the other
them.
thing, and I didn't even tell him this a second ago, but uniquely in Alabama, we're given the opportunity to lead on conservative issues, and we need to lean in there to be able to set the example for the rest of the country. And so I was in D.C. was a week or 2 weeks ago, meeting with my dear friend Pam Bondi, our U.S. Attorney General. And one of the questions she asked me was, hey, did y'all pass an amendment to your death penalty statute dealing with those who harm children? The author behind that is sitting in this room today. And so going to have a vehicle to be able to challenge that state law. And so, it is why we're not a purple state.
Yeah.
And when we have a 10th Amendment to our Constitution that talks about the immense power of the states to exercise police power over its citizens, and when we are and should be on the forefront of conservative issues, we need to take advantage of those.
Yep, I completely agree. Last issue before we open it up to questions, and I think we can probably have a lengthy conversation on this, but again, I was one of the first times I came to this group, like I said, was that day when the Fairhope city councilman had signed on to a letter to the Biden administration saying, like, we want some refugees, bizarre thing to do. But is just the subject of immigration, I think is It's a tough issue. It can certainly be oversimplified, but I think at the heart of it, Trump, from the time he came down the escalator 10 years ago, has been crystal clear that this is a huge issue. We are. I am a proponent of replacement theory. I think that they are not only trying to get cheap labor, so that's the Chamber of Commerce argument. Oh, they're all here because the labor is cheap. Okay, I think that's fair. They're here to replace the electorate. I think that's probably a good point too. But I think it's deeper than that. I think it's more sinister than that. I think it's demographic warfare, and I think they're trying to replace us, right? Heritage Americans. They're trying to replace us. They're trying to replace our culture, our heritage, our God, and they're trying to wipe out the people who founded this country, right? I think that they are trying to do that. And, you look at what's happening over in Europe with Pakistani rape gangs, and they're just hordes and hordes of Muslims are going into these European countries, and they're just like, this is great. This is wonderful, because if they say anything different, they actually get thrown in jail. It's insane. Thank God we're not there here, but immigration is a huge issue, and when Springfield, Missouri, or not Springfield, there's a Springfield in every state. Springfield, Ohio, I think it was that the where the Haitians were being dropped in? That, for whatever reason, it was the breaking point. That was the breaking point. And while that was happening in Ohio, it was also happening here. Haitians were being dropped in Albertville, in Athens, in Enterprise. That was happening here, and it wasn't just Haitians. It was the CHNV program, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans. You guys remember the Venezuelans, the nice folks that really liked that apartment complex in Aurora and decided they'd make it their own, even though there was people already living there, and anyway, you remember that. It's a problem, and doesn't mean that we don't need to treat people who are here inhumanely, that they're not humans and created in God's image with dignity, but something has to be done about it. What are your thoughts on kind of the goings on of everything that's happened in immigration in the last the last year, and then really the last what did we just see on the news that World War III distracted us from? If you remember that, I think he called it the 12-day war is what Trump called it. Prior to the 12-day war, we were there was people with Mexican flags assaulting police officers in Los Angeles, right? That all from the threat of deportation. Yeah.
Remember Biden and Kamala said, we got to change the law to be able to secure the border. Remember that argument? Well, that's not true, right? So I had a chance to be able to go down to Arizona last month to meet with the Border Patrol agents there. And by the way, you're talking about a group that feels liberated. They're just we just get to do our job again. But they gave us some stats. I want to read these to you just to show you where we were to where we are now. We had, during the Biden era, 3 million inadmissible encounters with those illegally crossing between October 2023 and September 2024. Average monthly border encounters was 160,000 a month. Daily average at one time peaked to 15,000 a day. Approximately 11 million border encounters over the course of Biden's 4 years. 64,000 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the southern border. That's just seized, not what's got through, by the way, which is enough to kill 14 billion people. And that from January 20th to April 1st of 2021, the administration released over 184,000 illegal aliens into the country. Now, that was before this is currently. Illegal border crossings down 95%. That's not a change in the law. It's enforcing the law. Daily border encounters down 93%. Encounters with gotaways, and remember, these are the people that just took off. We don't know who they are, where they came from, or what they're about. That's down 95%. And migrant crossings themselves are down almost 98+%. In March of 2025, we had the lowest number of border encounters in recorded history at less than 7,200 total. And the lowest daily number of border encounters fell to less than 200 in February 2025. Fentanyl traffic down 54% compared to the year before. And then the first 100 days of the Trump administration, over 151,000 illegal aliens arrested and 135,000 deported, including 600 members of Tren de Aragua, as well as thousands of MS-13. Y'all, we ought to clap about that. And so it just shows you what can be accomplished when people are allowed to be able to do their jobs. But one of the things, again, that y'all, I will say, I love suing Joe Biden. Okay, that was a lot of fun. I should give you part of my salary back because you've let me be able to do that. But now we shifted gears, right? We have the Trump administration there. We want to be supportive of what they're doing. And so, seemingly the left cares more about MS-13 gang members than they do the safety and security of our communities. I mean, and that's kind of what we've seen. And so we've been able to support the president on the birthright citizenship question. By the way, the Supreme Court has still some cases that are coming out. That's going to be one of them. And so that's to be looking forward. I think there's a decision date tomorrow and maybe a couple more before out. So pay attention to that. We were able to support, and y'all, I'm insanely jealous of President Trump. He got sued by Gavin Newsom when I didn't. I love suing Gavin Newsom too. But he sued him over the National Guard. District judge, shockingly, sided with Gavin Newsom. I'm being facetious. We were able to get that reversed in the Ninth Circuit, which is not a conservative circuit. We lobbed in the brief to be able to support the ability of the commander-in-chief to activate the National Guard to be able to protect federal buildings because there was no protection going on in Los Angeles, right? I mean, we clearly have seen their ability to control problems. Remember the fires recently and kind of what took place there with the damage to property and how many people were displaced as a result of that? Well, you can't trust a mayor and a governor to be able to do it there. President Trump acted decisively, just as he did last week, and we saw that take place in the Middle East. And now things are much more calm again. And so we've been able to do it. And really do want to commend the words I heard from Senator Britt this week, because she's hit the nail on the head, and we've heard others talk about this before as well. If you're a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state, what do we expect for them to do? And if you want to be able to say, we're going to push back against the federal government being able to enforce valid laws on the immigration front, well, by golly, the one way to be able to push back on that is to say, we're going to take back your funding. And hopefully that's something that Congress will act and be able to do.
100%. Something that you outlined in the transgender thing is something that conservatives, Republicans, whatever, I use the word conservative, we've got to get it figured out to be able to fight the way that they fight. They are relentless, they're strategic, they are smart, despite being also wicked. And how can you call the people that are wanting to cut kids' genitals off and how do you call them smart? Okay, I get it, but the way that they operate in order to push these things it's unbelievable how good they are at it. They're we talk about 4D chess when we're complimenting Trump. These people are like 8D chess with the things they're doing. So,
but Brian, they have immense resources. Yeah. And so
USAID.
Yeah. Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
This is Men's Health Month. And there was a tweet from Planned Parenthood group that said, "Dear Men's Health Month, we want to make sure that men get cervical cancer screenings." All right. Cervical cancer screenings during Men's Health Month.
The picture on that was horrible too, by the way.
Yeah, just pushing that agenda. But y'all look, the federal government funded a grant that UAB had to study transgender male vaginal health.
UAB got a grant for that, right?
Yeah.
Yes, UAB got a grant for that.
Yeah, and so, again, this was a coordinated movement in which we need to be strategic in being able to push back.
Yeah. One more thing, I lied. I'll be honest when I lie. This is, I thought we were going to end with immigration, and then I had this thought come up of something else I wanted to talk to you about, and while I've got you here, we'll dive into it. I live in Wetumpka. It's just shy of this amazing city, Montgomery. It's where everybody wants to go. I mean, they've got a whitewater park.
I'm required to live under the Constitution.
They have this amazing whitewater park. Anyway, if you lived in the area, you would get the pain that is. Anyway, so I don't know if you guys know this, but Montgomery has a lot of violent crime. I don't know if this is news to you guys, but I'm here to report the news. And it reached a peak last summer, about a year ago, where it was completely rampant, out of control. I'll tell you a story. You guys may have read in 1819 News, because WSFA wasn't going to report it, but a nice, sweet woman who I know her family, named Amy Dix, was driving down Atlanta Highway, which is a normal road, in the middle of the day at like 2 in the afternoon. I can't remember if she had a kid in the car or not, but she was driving down the road, and shots ring out over basically a turf war at the Eastdale Mall. Bullets ripped through her car. went through her windshield and into her, and she's now paralyzed. I don't know, I can't remember if it's from the neck down or the waist down, but either way, she is paralyzed from this, and that was kind of the boiling point. Well, here's one. My wife and 7 children were in that parking lot an hour before that, okay? This is real people's lives. This is not turning on Fox News and watching this crazy thing that happened. It was out of control a year ago. And Steve, I have to compliment you, the most humble person I've met. Like, he will take no credit for this, but the Montgomery, I call it the Montgomery Area Crime Suppression Unit. It's actually called the Metro Area Crime Suppression Unit. I call it the Montgomery area, but that's neither here nor there. You came in with Hal Taylor and a bunch of other head law enforcement, and you guys put it down. Talk about that.
Yeah. Y'all, somebody brought me cookies to say thank you. How about is that, right? I mean, when you get food for the work you do as a matter of public policy, that is a good day in my world. But no, look, I live in Montgomery. I'm in the grocery store. I'm in the convenience store, and people were not feeling safe when they saw the stories. We have Democratic mayor. You saw narrative about law enforcement that wasn't positive. And you didn't see law enforcement that were allowed to do the job in the way they need to be able to do their job. And look, Al Taylor is your secretary of ALEA, troopers, SBI. They're not generally responsible for city public safety. We have a really strong sheriff in Montgomery, Derek Cunningham. He's not responsible day to day for that. But there was just this demand from folks in the community that we have to act. And it's one that, I was talking today about the Declaration of Independence and why it's so important that we talk about that during this 250th anniversary. Part of the pushback against the monarchy was you're acting without the consent of the governed. In essence, the will of the people is not being reflected in what's going on. The will of the people in our state was you got to do something about it. Yeah. And you can't say, well, that's not generally my responsibility, but we got together, said we're going to devote the resources, and y'all, it's been remarkable achievement, and again, great effort. Really appreciate the legislature seeing that as a model that Birmingham, if you hadn't seen the stories in Birmingham, being able to make a difference. But y'all, it really is just, and can we acknowledge the heroes that law enforcement are, by the way? I mean, just the men and women that are really willing to be able to risk their lives. And kind of like the Border Patrol agents I talked about earlier, just let them do their jobs, is allowing law enforcement to be able to do their jobs in Montgomery. And I will tell you 2 stories that show kind of the impact that we've had, and there's still more work to do. Is had a woman call me that lived in Montgomery all of her life, one of the poorer communities in town, and she said, as a result of what y'all have done, I feel safe to be able to sit out on my front porch again. I mean, y'all, it's a fundamental right of everybody to feel safe in their own communities, in their own neighborhoods, and she was beginning to feel safe again. And then, what was the other story? Oh, this is the bad part about getting older. I told you about the cookies. It was good too. Anyway, I'll think of it in a second, but it's really been a blessing to be able to see kind of what, when you don't care who gets the credit, what we've been able to accomplish, and excited about this going other places. But I'll also say this, you don't see that same problem in Baldwin County. You got a legacy of leadership here that matters. You got a DA who understands the enforcement of the rule of law, and that matters from the standpoint of public safety. But thank you for highlighting that. But we had a lot of folks that have done good stuff, and again, there's still more to do. Montgomery had some bad incidents this weekend with the downtown, businesses there, and that's not good for the capital city to be viewed in that way. No, and it's going to be a perpetual problem. When you have, this is another story we covered. Maybe it'll jog your memory on your story, but we covered the mayor the night his election party the night before the last election. He had a bunch of gangster rappers at his election party that are rapping about shooting people and like pimping hoes and such. Okay, and you're like, I can't figure out why this is going on. Our mayor is bringing in gangster rappers to talk about shooting people. And there's people shooting people. Let's see if we can connect those dots. So very bizarre. When you come in with a mayor who is a person who is in a position of leadership that's elected, the number one thing that the government is supposed to do is protect their people like that. Like,
I'm not real big on a big government. I don't want them doing a lot, but making sure the community's safe is like high on that list.
Yeah, when we talk about the police powers, right, public safety is paramount. And that's, I think, one of the things that's the expectation for where we are. By the way, do y'all like this format? Is this good? Better than hearing an AG just come in and pontificate? So thank you for having this idea. And we talk sometimes on the podcast, but I think for me, this is kind of a neat way to communicate.
Yeah.
So
I wish I could do all my podcasts this way. Maybe that's the future. I think, do you want to open it up for questions?
How are we on time? 2 questions? Okay.
Oh.
All right. Pressing questions.
Stephanie?
Coalition to investigate prosecuting Anthony Fauci. What is the status of that from an Alabama standpoint, leading the charge to dive into that investigation and potential prosecution?
Yeah, so law enforcement folks don't like to talk about investigations, so let me say this. But we did sign on to a letter with multiple states requesting, because if you recall, thank you for the question, by the way, the House recovered documents that otherwise folks have not been able to see. South Carolina is leading that investigation, working with a team around the country, and to the extent that there are state laws or matters that can be further pursued, then the states are willing to be able to do that. So thank you for asking that question.
Is it not working? I want everyone to hear my question. I came from the left to become a conservative because of transgender ideology. I know this subject extremely well. I've studied it for 5 years, and it affects everybody. It's not just a few confused kids, and this man is a hero. What you have done, it's not just protecting those poor, confused kids. This is about boundaries to keep women and children safe. And I do have a question. There's so much I want to say. This ideology is deeply embedded everywhere, in all of our universities, and then it goes into medicine, it goes into law, it goes everywhere, and we've got to root it out. You've probably heard of queer ideology. Most people thinks that means being nice to gay people. That's not what it means. It means about the breaking down of boundaries. So my question is, I was in Walmart here, and there was a man with a wig and a dress bothering people. And I thought, if he goes into the ladies, I will call 911. But I don't know where we stand on this. So in the UK, our Supreme Court in April clarified, they didn't change the law because our Supreme Court can't do that, but it clarified that our laws, when it says male and female, man and women, means biological sex only. I'm really confused where we are in America, or I don't, I know each state is different. I mean, I want to know where we stand in Alabama. Like, if I go into the ladies and there is a man in there, can I call the police and say there is a man in here? And how do we get this clarified in law so everybody understands what male and female is? And again, thank you again.
So the good thing is we've clarified that in Alabama law. We were able to pass and make it abundantly clear. Y'all remember the famous response from Ketanji Jackson to Senator Blackman, can you define a woman? And she goes, no, I'm not a scientist. Well, we've been able to make that abundantly clear in Alabama based on them acting. So you have Alabama, but you also have other states that clearly are not willing to do the same thing. And so it's the purpose of our legislative body to be able to act aggressively when, who would have thought we needed a definition of woman 10 years ago, 5 years ago, frankly, in some respects, but yet seemingly that's the world that we're in. But there are also opportunities for the courts to be able to weigh in, as they did in the UK. And so depending on the specific issue or the case that's in front of them and the statute that's there, one of the big victories for, I think, the country is Alabama led the charge to make sure that the ERA was not a part of our Constitution. Because it would have had language that said, you cannot discriminate on account of sex. And this is back from 1972 when it started. There was no question in 1972 who was a man and who was a woman. But you give the left and make that a part of the Constitution. Can you imagine the arguments they're going to make as a constitutional right and use gender identity as opposed to sex being the way they define it? And so I think every court victory matters. The things that we can do to be able to uphold that in our state matter. And then I think, again, the ability to push back on some of these institutions. Even after the Scamidi case, the Tennessee case came out this week, the American Pediatric Association, despite the fact that Europe has made it abundantly clear in the Cass report that we have systemic reviews of studies that have come out that have said the evidence isn't there, that gender-affirming care is the appropriate treatment. We had the American Pediatric Association still say this is the gold standard moving forward. And until we engage, until we find alternative organizations that will stand up conservative doctors to be able to push back, then we're going to continue to have these fights. But y'all, it hasn't gone away, although I really do think that pendulum has swung in the right direction for us. The key for us is not to be complacent. The key for us is to continue to be aggressive, mount those victories up, and eventually, I think, even in our blue states, we're going to be able to make progress. The girls' sports and bathroom issue, we've been able to make some. I mean, look, Gavin Newsom came out and said, the sports thing really shouldn't be happening. And if you got that rhetoric as somebody that wants to be president of the United States in 3.5 years, then you know that you're causing the left to have to change their narrative a little bit. We got to continue to be aggressive in moving that front. Thanks for what your group is doing to protect kids.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Anybody else? Questions? What's wonderful? Oh.
Somebody ask Bryan a question. He needs to be able to answer.
I know enough about this to even ask you the question, but I have heard that our Fairhope library has books in it for the children that are sexually explicit. The conservatives have asked that they be moved to the adult section, not removed from the library, just the adult section. And if you want your child to go into the adult section and see sexually explicit, that's good. But Fairhope is pushing against that. Now, I was at Legislative Days, and it was my understanding that they voted to take away the funding. Can you tell me where that is?
Bryan, do you know from your reporting, and by the way, there's an interesting case traveling in another state that we filed a brief, or will be filing a brief on, supporting the effort to be able to protect kids in libraries, and so that's going to be one to be able to follow. But do you know the status? I don't know. Read the reporting.
I know John Wall came on to the state library board. They fired Nancy Pack, who was the head. And now I think they're moving to use that apparatus. I don't know. I don't think anything passed in the legislature. So I think there's several different angles they're trying to use. My favorite, it sounds like based off of everyone who's running for city council in here, you guys have adopted this strategy too. I call it the Prattville strategy. And so when all the very first library that got blown up over this stuff was in Prattville. And the moms and parents showed up with their pitchforks to the library board, and they blamed city council. And so they went with their pitchforks to city council, and the city council blamed the library board. And it was like everybody just pointing fingers, and the moms were like, could we just get the porn out of the kids section? Like, somebody, please, right? It's just unbelievable that this is going on. And I said, you watch, they're gonna pick off the library board, and they're gonna go after the city council. Now every single position in the Prattville Library Board is held by a conservative, and they're now starting to pick off or working on picking off city council members. And so that's my recommendation for Fairhope and anywhere else. And it sounds like you guys are obviously actively doing that. There's like 18 people in here running for city council, which is amazing. And God bless you.
To address the same question, I know Rebecca Watson with Moms for Liberty is here tonight, and she worked hard on that specific issue. So,
yeah, she could give us the update. Actually,
I can try, but I will say there were no pitchforks.
Okay,
Metaphorical. That wasn't involved. So, we have funding that's given to our library through our city, which is about $1.2 million. And then we have APLS funding, which is divvied out in quarter segments, and the libraries have to apply for that quarterly. And so we had been going to the city council for about 2 years with no resolve, no acknowledgement, actually, that that these books were even in here. And so I really do not like to beat a dead horse. So I said, I'll just go to APLS, I'll bring some books, and I'll just ask if they are against the APLS policies. And that's what I did. And they were. And I requested that the funding be paused until the library becomes compliant. They paused the funding and gave them the opportunity to get in compliance, and they will have that opportunity every single quarter to get into compliance. The APLS will never pull their funding indefinitely because they want every library to have the opportunity to comply and to receive those state funds. In the meantime, we have a group here called Read Freely Alabama, and they want the books to stay where they are. So it began with, there are no books. They do not exist. To, well, there's a few. To, well, actually, there's pictures now, and they're vulgar and encouraging our kids to go online and look at pornography. And so what we're going to do is move that book. And it just kind of was a slow process. So in the meantime, this Read Freely Alabama group has started raising money. So I think it's important that we all know that there are groups in Baldwin County and throughout Alabama, and they are well-funded and well-organized, just like you guys were talking about. And so this group is associated with an umbrella group called Every Library, and they are a national group. And what they do is they go into little towns all over the United States, and they push for this information to be put into our kids' hands. And the scary thing is that the real target is our schools. And if you look on their website, you'll see all of it. So they have Read Free Alabama has Every Library help them with their website, help them with their fundraising. And so they did a national fundraiser. So I went through all 658 donations, all 61 pages, I think, and I itemized them all based on where they came from, were they local, I wanted to know percentages, I'm a finance person, I wanted to know the numbers. 25% of the $46,000 that was raised came from Fairhope. Everything else came from outside of Fairhope.
Wow.
In addition to that, many states were donating that are from the West Coast, even internationally. So what we have here is a group that now has a chunk of money that is saying to our library, you know what, you don't need state funding, we will fund you. So if our library takes that money, do we have a privately funded library or do we have a public library? I say, if you take that money, our library is no longer publicly funded. And so I am pushing for every single book to be relocated, where if a parent wants their child to read it, they can get access to it. And we don't have to watch our kids more closely in our libraries than we do on the playground or around a grocery store or around a bunch of strangers. It is ridiculous.
All right.
And I'm not going to stop until it's taken care of. But
Amen.
At this point, they do not have their funding. And until they move the books, Chairman Wall has, and he has always followed his word with me, so I trust him. He will not reinstate their funding, and I will also call for the removal of them in our public shared book system where Fairhope can now share books. I'm going to ask for them to be removed from that because they are violating the contract with our county commission.
Thank you, Rebecca. That'll wrap it up on the questions. And the Read Freely people are big fans of mine. I was featured in AL.com for, I was at an event very similar to this with the folks in Prattville where I said, burn the freaking books. And then they publish it in nail.com like a gotcha. No, I'm like, no, burn the freaking books. Like, no, like, please. Well, anyway, that's not the legal strategy. So don't say that if you're like actually trying to, position yourselves to actually get something done. But it's a crazy thing. And I'm passionate. I have 7 children. My daughter, who's actually sitting right over here, Reagan, okay, we went into the Wetumpka Library, and we have a list of books that we choose from, classic books that are recommended by the classical Christian schools, and they're even taking books and they're using the names of books that would be on Christian lists, and the binders are really boring, and you grab them and throw them in the basket. Next thing you know, my wife and kids are on the way home, and she's handing books out or whatever, and Reagan looks at the book and says, "Mommy, I don't think this is appropriate. It was the Emperor's New Clothes." Well, you don't want to know what the Emperor's New Clothes were, I can tell you that. So with that, I know we're up against time constraints here. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to come out. Steve, do you have any last words?
No, great event. Thank y'all for doing it. Interesting transition for me, being AG for the last 8.5 years, remarkable privilege. Looking forward to getting out there telling you what I could be as a United States Senator. So looking forward to that conversation too.
Awesome. And again, this is the podcast, so I've got to wrap it up and say thanks and put your trust in God and keep your powder dry.